Residential schools were a network of residential boarding schools for Native Americans funded by the Canadian government. In total, 30% of Native Americans nationally, which equals to about 150,000 children, passed through the system, and at least 4,000 of them died. In the schools were controlled by the Christian churches and the Anglican Church of Canada, in an attempt to assimilate Native American children into dominant Canadian culture. These children were taken from the influence of their families and put into these schools. Many children who died were rarely given a proper funeral. The Canadian government seemed to just sweep the deaths under the carpet as if they didn't happen. It was not until 1922 when Dr. Peter Bryce, who was no longer working for the government, brought it to light that the cause of the majority of deaths in the residential schools were to disease. And at the time, the mortality rate could have been lowered had the children who had tuberculosis not come in contact with those who didn't. At one point, according to John Malai, in A National Crime, the Canadian government in the residential school system, 16 ill children were found in one classroom, many close to death, who were forced to sit through the lesson. Although there is controversy due to the fact that day schools for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children outnumber those of residential schools, a consensus surfaced that residential schools did a lot of harm to those who attended. Of those 150,000 children, a study was done by Robertson, Boyd Hawkeye, in which he found out that out of a sample of 127 people who attended the schools, half of them were diagnosed with, half of them had criminal records, 64% of them were diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, 7% were diagnosed with anxiety disorder, and 7% were diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. When you actually look at these numbers, it's quite disturbing. What caused these numbers were a great amount of physical and sexual abuse to these children. There are many apologies from the federal government, the Anglican Church of Canada, and there was also an expression of sorrow from the Vatican. Chief Fontaine had a meeting with Pope Benedict XVI in 2009, trying to obtain an apology for the abuses of the residential schools.